Hi guys, Olive here today to talk about the books I read in July 2023. Starting with fiction, of course, in July I read Nothing, Everything by Virginia Montanez, which is by a local Pittsburgh author. The main character of this book is an author herself. She writes young adult novels, and she's raising her two children as a single mother following her divorce from their father, when someone from this main character's childhood waltzes back into her life. At first, when I started reading this, I was very afraid that the writing was going to force me to put it down at a certain point, because the tone it starts with is very much that of a blog. Now, that does make sense because of who this author is. She wrote a blog for many years. She now writes a newsletter, a very good one, I might add. But the tone that the narrator starts with is very much as though she's addressing her audience. Like she's way too aware of her reader and is addressing us directly. And that got very cringy at the start of this book, but I am pleased to report that that more or less wore off as the book went along. We bounce back and forth between modern day sections when our main character Ellis is dealing with motherhood and this new/old love interest, and then also scenes from her childhood, so flashback scenes. And I actually found that I was way more invested in those flashback scenes, in everything that was going on in the past, because there was just more going on. Like, it took a really long time for things to actually start happening in the present day sections. But ironically enough, the very best scene in this book happens during the present day. It's a scene during which this love interest/man from the past is talking Ellis's autistic daughter through a performance at the Pittsburgh Symphony. And it is absolutely beautiful. I thought this was pretty decent for a debut novel. There were definitely stumbling points. There's definitely room for improvement. But I did like a lot of this. I just personally wish this author had made Pittsburgh a little bit more of an important part of this story. She said at the author event of hers that I went to when she was launching this book that she intentionally didn't make Pittsburgh its own character within this story, if you will. And if I could go back in time, I would raise my hand during the question section and ask her why she chose to do that. Because Pittsburgh is such an important part of her personal story. I know a little bit about her, and Pittsburgh is a big part of her life. And I think it would have added something really special to this book to have Pittsburgh be more present in the story. And it would especially have been great for readers like me who live here in Pittsburgh. But as it stands, this is a 3-star book. I also ended up having some mixed feelings about the Storygraph recommendation I took for the month of July, which was A Theater for Dreamers by Polly Sampson. This is a fictionalized account of the lives of the writers Charmian Clift and George Johnston and their time spent on the Greek island of Idra. And this book is told through the eyes of a motherless teenage girl named Erica, who spends time with them and a whole other cast of characters on this island, which includes Leonard Cohen. Let me first say, because I do think it's the most important thing about this book, that it is beautifully written. Even though it contains a fair amount of tragedy, animosity, gossip, frankly, it is incredibly relaxing to read. It felt like it just transported me directly to this island. I felt like I was sitting right there with the characters, which then leads me to the next point, that the main character of this book, Erica, she's a bit annoying. But she's supposed to be. She's attaching herself to Charmian like a barnacle, looking to make a mother figure out of this tortured character. But for all of that human drama, there is very little plot to speak of. You kind of just need to be willing to be carried along with the current as Polly Sampson takes you down this beautiful, lazy river. At times, I was happy to do that. Other times, I was mentally begging for something to happen. More than anything, this book felt like a novel-length, more literary version of the season 2 Mad Men episode called The Jet Set, in which Don Draper temporarily joins this group of pleasure-seeking wanderers. The feeling of this book reminded me so much of that episode. Then for my latest episode of What's the Story, Wishbone, I read The Adventures of Robin Hood by Howard Pyle, which is a collection of stories all about the legendary outlaw Robin Hood, who, as it turns out, gives to the poor a whole lot less than his reputation would have you think. I did have a lot of fun with these stories. Certain ones did have me a little bit concerned about the facial recognition regions of some of these characters' brains, because Robin Hood and his merry men are able to successfully disguise themselves far too many times. But in case you missed my recap of the very famous episode of Wishbone that adapts this novel, I'll link that for you in the description box and up in the cards. The last novel I am going to talk about, however, absolutely takes the cake. It is the best novel I read in July. It's the best novel I've read in a really long time, actually. It's We Are Called to Rise by Laura McBride. This is a contemporary novel set in Las Vegas, and it stars 4 interconnected characters. We meet a middle-aged woman whose husband is leaving her for another woman. We also meet an 8-year-old Albanian boy living in a very tense home environment. Then there's also a wounded soldier with a very complex story of how he became wounded. And then finally, there is a social worker who is dedicated to helping kids in the area. From the very first character perspective, I knew this was going to be something special. I felt pretty much immediately invested in this story, and that does not happen to me a lot. It normally takes me a little while to warm up to a novel, but not in this book's case. I loved seeing the way these characters' lives intertwined, even during the heartbreaking and infuriating moments. I felt so absorbed by these stories. This is a book about healing. Essentially, it's a book about confronting hard things in our past, dealing with those emotions, working to find a way to move on, and trying to find a way to do good in a world that can often be just awful. I don't have a whole lot more to say about this book besides the fact that I really, really loved it. I actually talked about this in a video I made quite some time ago now about how I rate books, but I talked in that video about how challenging it can be to talk about 5-star books because all I want to do is gush about the book, versus when I talk about 3 or 4-star books, I can actually weigh the positives versus the negatives. I can be a whole lot more objective because I don't feel so strongly about them. But this book, it just makes my heart want to explode because it is so moving and it's so well done. Even the way this author talks about Las Vegas, she totally captures the feeling of it. And I can say that with a little bit more certainty because at the end of the month, I actually took my first trip to Las Vegas. Since I knew I was going to be going to Las Vegas in July, when I went book shopping with a friend not too long ago, I decided to pick up a used copy of Bringing Down the House by Ben Mezrich. I thought this would be fun to bring along for the plane and to read by the pool for however long we could stand the 115-degree heat, which was not very long. This is the true story of how a group of MIT students back in the late 1990s and early 2000s first developed and then successfully worked a system to beat blackjack by counting cards and then also by essentially playing acting roles at tables in order to keep casinos from figuring out what was going on. And that was important because it's technically not cheating to count cards. It's just deeply frowned upon. And casinos can kick you out if they catch you doing it, or they can intimidate you using some very scary methods to keep you from doing it. Their system worked really well, and they got away with it for a really long time. They earned an obscene amount of money until the casinos figured it out. And the most frustrating part about this book was definitely how long some of these kids wanted to keep it going when clearly it wasn't a good idea. It had passed its expiration date, but they just kept on going. I finished this on the plane ride home, and I was having to take breaks from it because I was getting so frustrated at these kids. And I was in the middle seat, so I was testy enough already. I was really surprised when I found out that this was Ben Mezrich's first foray into nonfiction, because I know him from his nonfiction books. He tends to write about shady or more covert dealings like this one, although randomly he also did write a book about the woolly mammoth. We love a man with range. But I can see why he continued writing nonfiction after writing this one. He has a skill for writing thrilling, cinematic works of nonfiction, which does help to explain why this one was adapted into a movie, which, yes, I did watch after we got home. And I can confirm it's not as good as the book. Sometimes the movie is better than the book, just not in this case. Some of the tactics these MIT kids used very obviously wouldn't work today, what with all of our new technology and specifically all the new airport security after 9/11, which I experienced firsthand being in airports in July. So I would sometimes tell my husband about some of the things they would do in this book, and we got a good chuckle out of it because it just wouldn't work today. And this wasn't all that long ago, but this was a lot of fun. It was occasionally frustrating for reasons outside of this author's control. And I'm not a gambler myself. This book did not tempt me into becoming one, but I had a great time reading it, and I'm really glad I brought it to Vegas. Also on an airplane, I read the entirety of Hoop Muses by Kate Fagan, which is an illustrated history of women's basketball in the United States from the invention of the game all the way up to the present day. This book was clearly written for readers of all ages. I could definitely see younger girls being able to pick this up and understand most of the content and have a great time reading it, which is really nice on one hand. I'm glad that this book will get into the hands of more readers that way, especially because a lot of these stories are accompanied by some very fun illustrations. I would just say it wasn't maybe ideal for a reader like myself because it didn't go quite as deep as it could have. I'm a women's basketball fan myself. I actually brought this book along to Vegas because I had tickets to go see the Las Vegas Aces play, which was an incredible experience, might I add. If you ever have the opportunity to go see the Aces play at home, do it. You will not regret it. But because I'm a basketball fan, a lot of the recent history discussed in this book I did already know, but it was great to get a high-level recap of some earlier events and notable figures. Their stories were so inspiring, and it actually gave a lot of additional meaning to the Aces game that I went and saw, because playing professionally wasn't always an option for women. They didn't have the choice to dedicate themselves to the sport they loved and achieve new heights within the sport that playing at that level demands of you. And while I would say there still aren't as many opportunities for female athletes as there should be, seeing the best team, record-wise anyway, in the best, most competitive league out there play a great game of basketball, it was pretty amazing to see how far we've come. I was also moved by Born a Crime by Trevor Noah, one of the 23 nonfiction books I made a point of wanting to read in 2023. I have been hearing people sing this book's praises since it was first released. I have been on BookTube that long, and I wanted to finally experience it for myself. Now that I have, I can see what everyone loves about this. The subtitle of this book is very accurate in that this book is a collection of memories from this author's upbringing in South Africa. He was born during apartheid, which complicated his early life pretty significantly since he was born to a Black mother and a white father, which at the time was a crime. Hence this book's title. Things did change for him as things changed within South Africa, but from his stories you can see that his race had so much to do with his experience growing up, especially because race was such a focus within the country. And there were all of these ridiculous, nonsensical classifications that divided people. In this book, he discusses challenging things, horrifying things, but because he is also a comedian, there are just as many funny stories or moments where he pokes fun at himself as the naive troublemaker that he definitely was as a kid. But more than anything, this book seems to be intended as a tribute to his mother, who seems like she is such a character, such a force to be reckoned with. He clearly loves her very much and stands in awe of how much strength she has. This was a fantastic reading experience. But the only thing that would have made it better is if he had discussed in this book how his past informs the person he is today. In this book, he doesn't really discuss his life past a certain point, and I found myself wondering why. Why would you limit this book in that way? I don't know if he has plans to write another memoir. I know he's releasing another book this year, but it's not another memoir. If there had even been a small element of him discussing how all of these experiences shaped the person he is today, then this would have been a 5-star read for me. But even without those things, it did come very close. But the other book I picked from that 23 nonfiction books to read in 2023 list was unquestionably a 5-star read. It's An Immense World by Ed Yong, a book all about what we presently know about what animals perceive through their senses and how drastically that can differ from what we humans perceive. If you enjoy being so blown away by science that you feel like a tiny speck weak within the universe, but like in a good way, then this will be a book for you, as it was for me. As the author notes in this book, there's all this focus on alien life, especially with the news as of late, but you don't have to leave the planet at all to find creatures who lead lives so different from ours that it'll blow your mind. This is yet another example of how I am frequently left gobsmacked by the 5-star books I read. What does Knightley say in Emma? If I loved you less, I'd be able to talk about it more. I feel that way about this book. Ed Yong is just a master at what he does. He presents you with so much science, but in a way that doesn't overwhelm you. It actually sucks you in completely. I am so in love with the way he writes and with this book. And since I apparently can't get enough animals in my life, in July I also read 2 books on horses. Wild Horses of the Summer Sun by Tori Bilski, which is a memoir about the author's mainly annual trips to Iceland in order to ride the native horses there, and Wild Horse Country by David Phillips, a sweeping history of the American Mustang and an examination of the very flawed system currently being used to contain their numbers. Both of these were 4-star reads for me. Very solid, hearty stock, you could say. If you are curious about one or even both of them, then I invite you to watch the review video I made in which I discuss both of them at length, and I will link that video for you in the description box below and up in the cards. So those were my reads of July, with admittedly a little bit of run over into early August. I've been doing so much traveling lately that it's been very challenging to get all the reading done that I want to, but now I'm going to be home, at least for the foreseeable future, so I'm hoping to fully get back on track now. But if you're intrigued by any of the books I talked about today, if you've read them and you want to share your thoughts, or if you just want to chat about anything in general, please feel free to use the comment section below. All the books I mentioned today and any other videos I talked about, all of those will be linked in the description box below for your clicking convenience, and at the bottom of that exact same description box, you'll also see links to everywhere you can find me around the internet. Goodreads, the Storygraph, Instagram, all the places I'm the most active, just in case you want to keep up with what I'm reading and what I'm doing right now. Thanks so much for watching. Hope you're having a wonderful day, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.